If you buy a pure electric car, then you are in for a shock, pun fully intended. And I don't just mean a battery fire after a crash kind of shock either, although that can't be ruled out. What I mean is that the cost of owning an EV is more than just money. And even if it were just money, electric vehicles have a habit of costing people far more of that than they bargained for. The electric vehicle revolution is environmentally disastrous, as I've covered previously on this channel, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it more again in future. The sheer volume of mining, refining, transporting, and manufacturing of countless tons of toxic raw materials in order to create a single EV battery in the name of saving the environment is sheer insanity, but you already knew that. What you might not yet fully have realized is the cost to the owner of buying an EV, putting aside the cost to the environment. But every day, more and more people are waking up to the financial disaster that is an EV, which, ironically, more people waking up to it is going to make the situation even worse. Buying an EV will cost you. And buying a cheap EV, well, that'll probably cost you even more. Not only are you not saving the environment, you're not going to be saving any money either. Now, before we get to the details, my name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us. And there is plenty of nonsense out there when it comes to electric vehicles. You can help me to keep the Topher Project going by buying me a coffee via the button on my website, topherfield.net. And you can find my best-selling books, my multi-award-winning DVD, and all of my merchandise with a range of different designs at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. I have the original Good People Break Bad Laws design available in a t-shirt, in a ladies t-shirt, and yes, you can get the ladies t-shirt in hot pink. There is also a hoodie. Plus, there's a new Good People Break Bad Laws design where the print actually goes on the back of your chosen garment instead of the front. I think that looks pretty cool. And then there is the Truth Will Set You Free 832 design also on the back. Then all the other designs are on the front, including this Net Zero, which is my way of saying no to net zero, plus my favorite quote, which is history, saying, "Don't make me repeat myself." And then there is my absolute all-time favorite design that I've ever made, Too Much 1984, Not Enough 1776. I'm not going to explain it. If you know, you know. And if you know, then you know that you want one. And they're all available from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, and whichever one you choose, you will be helping me to keep the Topher Project going. Okay, so what's the real cost of owning an EV? Well, the costs, the categories of cost, well, they're the same as owning an internal combustion engine car, only worse. There's fuel, which you pay for whether it's in liquid form or in electrons. Then there's servicing and maintenance, which is the one area where EVs do perform really, really well. But then there's insurance, which is fast becoming a problem for EVs. Then there's repairs, and that is a dumpster fire, if you'll pardon the pun. And then there is the hammer blow, depreciation. And all of that is before we mention the fact that the cheaper EVs that are now flooding the market as we speak, well, they're built to a similar quality standard as a cheap toaster, and they're useful for much the same thing. Let's break it all down. Firstly, fuel or energy, as the case may be. Now, the car that I drive is an 8-year-old Volkswagen Passat diesel, so it's a full-sized family sedan with a diesel engine. Looking at the dash, my long-term fuel economy sits right around the 6 litres per 100k mark. Often actually slightly better than that, but let's round it up to 6 litres of diesel per 100 kilometres. Now, prices of diesel where I live, well, they move around between the $1.60 range up into the high 170s range. So let's take $1.70 per litre as the average. So I'm personally paying $10.20 in fuel for every 100 kilometres that I travel. $10.20. Now, the same trip in a full-sized electric car requires about 18 kilowatt hours of energy, depending, of course, on the vehicle. And whilst prices at supercharging stations does vary, you're looking at an average of around about 70 cents per kilowatt hour delivered to your car, or $12.60 for that same 100 kilometres of travel, give or take. Now, that's going to change with fluctuations in fuel prices and changes in electricity prices. That's a given. An EV won't always be more expensive to fuel than an internal combustion engine car will be, but it's pretty clear that it won't consistently be cheaper either. And that's not counting the idling fees that supercharging stations are now beginning to charge their customers, often set at 50 cents per minute and up to $1 per minute of idle time. What does that mean? Well, it means that EV owners are being charged as much as $60 an hour for the sin of not moving their car after the battery is full. Which means that, for example, if you were going to go shopping at a shopping centre and you were going to enjoy that front and centre parking that they offer right in front with superchargers for you as a virtuous electric vehicle owner, well, you might want to think again, because while you're in there shopping, as soon as your car is full, you better make a beeline and collect your car and move it and go and find a normal car parking spot stuck out there with all of us plebs, us internal combustion engine mob. And if you don't, then you'll find yourself paying an extra $60 an hour for the privilege of leaving your car in that special parking spot. And this is kind of the story with EVs. There's all kinds of hidden tricks and fees and inconveniences which catch people out. The headline costs, well, they can appear great. But the actual reality of living with these things, well, that's a different story. So that's fuel. What about servicing? Well, this is an area where EVs do very, very well, because the whole notion of needing regular servicing, regular oil changes every 10,000 or 15,000 kilometers, well, that's an obsolete concept with EVs. And that's great, because that does save money. Again, using my own car as an example, a full-size sedan, a brand new version of my car will cost you about $600 a year for servicing each year over the first 5 years of ownership. So not having to spend that money, well, that's a substantial saving for EV owners. Good for them. Chalk up a win for the EVs, but don't get too excited yet, because that's the only win that they're going to get. And a $600 per annum win will pale into insignificance compared to the hits that they're about to take. EVs are known to cost about 20% more to insure when compared to an equivalent internal combustion engine car. And that's just the beginning of the insurance story. See, increasingly we're seeing around the world, insurers are putting up their premiums on home insurance for people who park their EVs inside their house garages. We're starting to see apartment buildings actually refuse to allow EVs to park in their underground car parks at all, for obvious reasons. And when you do have a crash in your EV, it is far more likely to be written off, simply because the battery has to be replaced by default, just as a precaution. And that replacement is so expensive for many cars that the insurer will just write it off instantly the moment the bumper has a dent in it. And if you're insured for market value, you get the depreciated value. And that's a problem. And all of those costs feed back into the EV insurance premiums. And now, as the industry increasingly comes to realize the true and extraordinary costs of repairing EVs, premiums are just going to rise even further. So taken all together, the higher premiums, the impact on your home insurance, and the impact of, well, having an impact in your EV, the insurance side of things is a big problem already for EVs, and it's still getting worse. Now, the influx of cheaper Chinese EVs are ironically making the situation even worse again, because the build quality issues that some of these cars are having are leading to things like software glitches and other relatively simple failures, and importers such as BYD are gaining a reputation for not giving a rat's about their buyers, often leaving them in the lurch with cars that just don't work. And those buyers are now chasing their insurance companies, begging the insurance companies to write the cars off just because of software glitches. But without the proper factory support and a factory-supplied fix, the buyers have cars that just can't be used, and they're trying to get them written off. This is a rapidly increasing problem, and it's being made way worse by this influx of cheap Chinese imports. And you won't catch me buying any of this plethora of cheap new imports, electric or internal combustion, because, well, to put it bluntly, They make the build quality of a 1990s Daewoo look good. But now, the big one. Depreciation. If you're planning to buy an EV, you had better be planning to keep it for life. Because if your plan is to sell it later on the second-hand market, you're in for a rough lesson in economics. EVs lose value faster than their internal combustion engine equivalents for two key reasons. The first is the nature of the technology, with batteries only having a certain amount of useful life. Now, the reality is that batteries these days are way better than they used to be, and a 10-year-old EV might still have 80% of its battery performance and endurance compared to when it was new. But we still run into the second problem, because that battery tech, well, it's getting better all the time, and it's getting cheaper all the time. So that 10-year-old or even 5-year-old or maybe even only 3-year-old EV, not only has it lost at least a little bit of its battery performance, but in that time, batteries have become larger, cheaper, and longer lasting in those years. And especially right now, with cheap and cheerful manufacturers entering the EV space, selling a 5-year-old Tesla, well, that's tough. As a result, pure EVs depreciate the fastest out of any vehicle category, coming in at a whopping 25% depreciation in their first year of ownership alone. Now, what's interesting here is that hybrids actually depreciate the least. They depreciate slower than petrol vehicles and slower even than diesel vehicles, which themselves come in at a very respectable 5% depreciation in the first year. Hybrids actually depreciate the least of all types, which does actually kind of make sense to me, because for a comparatively modest increase in the purchase price for a hybrid, the cost of a hybrid, it's not that much more than what we were already used to paying for example, a diesel engine. But a hybrid offers substantial reductions in petrol costs and actually a really enjoyable driving experience, especially compared to a diesel, without the EV worries about range or battery deg over time, because in the end, the performance and the range of a hybrid comes from the internal combustion engine and the size of the petrol tank. So hybrids, I think, could be a really good option for a lot of people. It remains to be seen what happens with hybrids when it comes to things like parking inside of apartment buildings and insurance after crashes. But the batteries being smaller and much less powerful seems to have allowed hybrids to have kind of gone under the radar a little bit. They seem to be largely unaffected by these sorts of EV concerns, at least for the moment. And even though I'm 100% opposed to ever owning an EV, I would definitely consider owning a hybrid. And clearly I'm not the only one who thinks like that, because the difference in people's mentality towards EVs versus hybrids is made very, very clear in their respective resale values. Hybrids, best resale value. EVs, worst. And if you think that any of these EV issues are going to go away anytime soon, think again, because here in Australia, electricity is getting more expensive, not cheaper. Preferential treatment for EVs, such as cheaper registration or exemption from the fuel excise, well, that's either being reduced or, in fact, they're actually looking at new ways to tax EVs directly because they don't pay the fuel excise. The depreciation problems aren't going to improve anytime soon either, as the market is flooded with cheap Chinese disposable cars. But perhaps the most serious of all is that now we're seeing moves in different parts of the world to simply refuse to serve people with electric vehicles at all, due to the fire risks. We're seeing some car-carrying companies upping the cost of shipping EVs or refusing them in the wake of multiple massive fires. In some cases, entire cargo container car-carrying ships have been lost out at sea, along with their entire cargo of cars, because a fire broke out in a car battery somewhere on board. We're now seeing that in British Columbia, the ferries there are simply refusing to accept any EV that has broken down or been in any sort of a crash, even if it's on the back of a tow truck. The fear that there might be some slight damage to the battery which could spark a fire, that fear is just too great. So if you're travelling in an electric vehicle to any of British Columbia's many islands and you happen to have a breakdown or a bingle, good luck, because you're not going home, or at least you're not going home and taking your car back to the mainland with you. The really bad news for EV owners is that there is only bad news still to come. I mean, yes, battery technology will continue to develop. Range will continue to get better. Costs will come down. All of that's true. But we already knew that. What's also true is that the romance with electric cars has worn off. The rose-colored glasses are gone. Once upon a time, EVs were looked at as an almost magical solution to the world's problems. And now they are viewed far more realistically as a source of a whole bunch of new problems that we didn't have before. And that's not to say that EVs can't make sense anywhere or ever, only that they don't make sense for most of us most of the time. Hey, if you're filthy rich and you want a second or third runabout car and you don't mind the risk of it turning into a toaster at any moment, sure, an EV might be the perfect solution for you. But for the rest of us mere mortals who have no choice but to care about things like running costs, insurance costs, depreciation and resale, and what happens if somebody bumps into us in a car park, for us, the EV dream is going up in smoke. And that doesn't actually make me sad, because all we've talked about in this video are the costs and inconveniences to the owner. If I were to add back in the environmental vandalism that each and every EV causes just by its mere existence, well then you'd see that EVs are destroying the world, not saving it, and that you can save your wallet by staying away from them. My name's Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to keep up with the world as it changes around you. I am 100% viewer supported and I run on pure caffeine. So please help me to stay caffeinated by buying me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. And don't forget to check out my full range of t-shirts, hoodies, books and DVDs, including the special edition Ladies Good People Break Bad Laws t-shirt in vibrant pink at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you so much for watching to the end. The algorithm loves you and so do I. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, think free.